Identity and Politics, a presentation by Kashvi Gera. Identity politics is often naively understood. It is seen as one-dimensional. Political movements usually focus on the issues and complexities within only one structure of identity. For example, we can take a look at the civil rights movement, and we can also take a look at the feminist movement, which ignores overlapping identity structures. Kimberly Crenshaw challenges this notion. She believes that, in fact, it is in fact intersectional and that political problems reflect overlapping structures of oppression. Her focus is on women of color, the civil rights movement, and the feminist movement, and she helps to reveal flaws in the single axis lens of politics through intersectionality. She discovers specifically that intersectionality is a way to understanding how multiple forms of inequality can sometimes be compounded to create struggles that aren't typically understood. She discovers three types of intersectionality: structural intersectionality, political intersectionality, and cultural and representational intersectionality. Crenshaw, in her work, exposes the systematic exclusions in policy, society, and misrepresentations in popular culture, using women of color as the center of her argument for intersectionality. From this, we can see that women of color battle two separate identity structures and view the world around them differently. I believe that we should extend Crenshaw's analysis of intersectionality. Intersectionality should be understood not as a framework limited to women of color, but as a wholesale theory of identity. Because individuals occupy multiple overlapping identity structures, political understanding itself is shaped by those intersections rather than by any single identity category. We can see that Crenshaw details the experiences of white women and men of color to explain intersectionality for women of color. However, white women with racial privilege and men of color with gender privilege also contain intersectional identities, which uniquely shape their understanding of politics. Accordingly, if intersectionality is a wholesale theory of identity, then everyone has an intersectional identity. Every identity structure shapes political understanding, even identity structures that typically contain levels of privilege. Privilege doesn't cancel out overlapping identities, it just changes how power operates around them. Let's consider working class white Americans who hold both racial privilege and economic marginalization. Due to their national identity, and specifically their race, they can feel represented by a majority white government. But due to their lack of economic security, they can also feel unrepresented by a majority upper class government in the United States. This might shape a political understanding of possible resentment towards elites in government, a lack of acknowledgement and understanding of racial justice, and ultimately a belief that the government protects others while ignoring them. Even individuals who hold racial privilege cannot be explained through a specific single lens identity structure. We can see that Crenshaw gives a similar example: white women in the feminist movement. The structural identity that grants them privilege, their race, didn't allow them to consider the struggles of other women of color, that the struggles that they might face. The Violence Against Women Act in 1991 successfully highlighted many white women victims. We can also take a look at undocumented immigrants and their intersectional identity, which is structured by class and legal status. They are incorporated into the American economy as low-wage workers, but they specifically cannot participate in politics due to their citizenship status. They are actively being affected by these policies, but they are unrepresented. Because undocumented immigrants must work within state-regulated systems, they have involvement with police, courts, bureaucracies, and more, but this can threaten their safety. This creates a political understanding where survival requires caution, invisibility, and fear of government instead of participation. This affects the extent to which people can safely participate in politics. Crenshaw gives an example of this when she details the language barriers that prevent some women of color from receiving the waiver created by the Immigration Act of 1990. If there is an undocumented status, Crenshaw rightly points out that this lack of access to resources makes it more dangerous, especially in the specific cases of domestic violence that she highlights. We can also take into account religious worldviews and atheist worldviews, which can be seen through the Muslim minority in India. Hindu nationalism dominates many parts of Indian identity through history, culture, and politics. As a result, Muslims are formally included as citizens but may feel excluded in their Indian national community. Ultimately, Muslims in India often understand politics with a less neutral viewpoint and instead focus their energies on increasing representation for Muslims in India. It becomes a site where loyalty must also be constantly demonstrated. From this, we can see that political understanding is also further shaped by position within identity structures, not by abstract citizenship alone. Crenshaw's example of the Two Life Crew controversy is comparable. Critics focused on either race or gender, ignoring how Black women were uniquely affected. We see that in India, debates about nationalism often spotlight Hindu identity while actively forgetting the perspectives of Muslim communities and their political understanding specifically. But why does this matter? If we understand that intersectional identities shape political understanding, regardless of privilege and dependent on both specific position within identity structures and participation in government, then one can reasonably conclude that in order to cultivate solidarity, there must be a recognition of different intersectional identities and their political understandings. We can see the epistemic view on democracy, which explains that democracy thrives when all diverse voices are included in the conversation, when everyone has a seat at the table. Crenshaw highlighted the systematic failures that people overlook when it comes to people of color, but this exists with many intersectional identities, so we must consider all these identities to avoid all these failures. Additionally, there's another reason to recognize intersectionality's importance. On the one hand, including diverse voices creates a diverse political atmosphere, but on the other, if you do not, it can lead to conflict and instability because it most likely will fail to protect marginalized groups and instigate political danger for those specific marginalized groups. Ultimately, while Crenshaw started the conversation of intersectionality, it is important to continue it to all identity structures. The solution is inclusion, especially in the current politically heated society. People should try to understand all intersectional political understandings. Thank you.